It's great to be here. It's like I said this morning in the class, it's great to be back. I enjoyed my family, and I enjoyed getting to meet the rest of Laura's family, and so it was a great week overall. Glad to see all of you again. We have many visitors, many new faces in our audience this morning, and we would invite you to just stick around for a little bit longer and let us get to know you. Let us take you out to eat, whatever the case may be. We want you to know that you're always honored and welcome here at Dover. And let us know if there's anything that we can do to better serve you as well. Before I get into the meat of my lesson this morning, in Hebrews chapter 3, we've got our holiday meal on December the 14th. And I challenge you to invite someone that doesn't normally go here to that meal. It's going to be a great day for us to fellowship with one another. It's going to be a great day for us to be together. And so what better way to invite someone from the community than that day? And so please take advantage of that to the full extent and invite a friend or a family or whatever the case may be to that. So when we think about the book of Hebrews, as we get into Hebrews chapter 3, we talked about this chapter in class last week, but we're going to look at it from a slightly different approach. We're going to look just at the warning that is given in Hebrews chapter 3. But thinking about some context for the book of Hebrews, it is a book of warnings and encouragement. Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 22 calls this a word of exhortation, and the word exhortation simply means encouragement in the modern day. And the ultimate encouragement of this book is for us to hold on to Christ. And so as we think about today, the danger of drifting away, let's keep that in mind. Because these people who are receiving this letter, they are in fear of persecution. They are in fear of the world around them. And their faith is such that they are considering giving up on Christ. And so the Hebrew writer gives them this warning very early on to hopefully help them correct their course. The warning is actually in Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 12. It says, "Take care, brethren, that there not be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God." And again, this idea is so prevalent in the religious world, because sometimes we're so focused on getting someone saved and things like that, but we fail to keep our saved soul saved. We fail to take that next step to nurture their faith and to build them up so that they remain faithful and get to see that heavenly home that we talk so greatly about. And so this warning is for all of us, because falling away can happen to all of us, but it's also some encouragement to help us to look for those people, look for those opportunities to strengthen someone else's faith so that they can be in heaven with us in that great and final day. And so we're going to talk about some things in regards to drifting away, and then we're going to talk about some encouragements for the Christian, and that will be our lesson this morning. And so the first thing that the Hebrew writer does in chapter 3 is he tells us to consider Jesus. In chapter 3 and verse 1 it says, "Therefore, holy brethren, partakers of a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the high priest of our confession." Consider Jesus. And what does that mean? What does it mean to consider something? Well, consider, the Greek word, I'm not a Greek scholar, so don't expect that from me, but there's the Strong's definition word if you want to look at that later. But the definition is to observe fully, to get a full picture of Jesus. And what's been going on up until this point in the book of Hebrews is that the Hebrew writer has been giving various illustrations, various pictures of Jesus as one who is the Son of God, as one who is greater than the angels, one who is greater than the prophets. We looked at the end of chapter 2, the reason that Jesus stepped into humanity, if you will. There are several reasons mentioned in chapter 2 about that. But as you keep reading through the first 6 verses of Hebrews chapter 3, it says, "He was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses was also in all his house. For he had been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, by just so much as the builder of the house has more honor than the house." Well, think about that. The Hebrew writer in verse 3 says that Jesus was counted as worthy of receiving more glory than Moses because the builder of the house is greater than the house. And what the writer is doing here is actually saying that Moses was a brick in the house. Moses was a brick in the house of God's master plan. But Jesus, being the Son of God, he is, in a sense, the builder of the house. You keep going on, he follows that instruction. Moses was faithful as a servant in the house. In other words, he was faithful as a brick building up the house. But Jesus was faithful as a son in the house. And at the end of verse 6 it says, "We are his house if we hold fast to our confidence and boast in our hope firm until the end." So consider Jesus. Think about who Jesus is. He is the Son of God. He is God with us, Matthew 1:23, as was said at his birth. And he showed time and time again by the things that he taught, by the miracles that he performed, that he was more than just a prophet. That he was more than just someone who would deliver them from captivity or whatever. He was someone who would deliver them from sin and death, the real problems of human nature. The point in considering Jesus is, if the people were expected to heed Moses, how much more should we be loyal to Christ? Moses, during his day and during his life, when God gave him the commandments to present to the people of Israel, and that would be as their law, that was authoritative. That was from God. And the people were expected to adhere to those laws associated with that idea. And Christ comes on the scene, and Christ being the Son of God, and He gives His own covenant. He gives His own law to us today. How much more should we listen to Christ? Because remember, Moses is a brick in the house, but Jesus is the builder of the house. So we should definitely consider our loyalty to Christ a thing to be taken serious. And drifting away begins when we lose our focus on Christ. And that's what's going on. The people that are receiving this letter, they're more focused on the persecution that's happened outside of their lives. They're more focused on the world around them rather than Christ. But drifting away begins when we lose our focus on that. When worship becomes routine, we talked about that a little bit this morning too. This is just what we do on Sundays. This is just what we do on Wednesday nights. We talked about it several weeks ago in a Sunday night sermon. The life of the early church, and the life of the early church was defined by a sense of awe. Every time they came together, every time the gospel was preached, every time people were baptized, there was a sense of awe in what was going on around them. And it never got old because it was a new thing to them. And here we are 2,000 plus years removed, and it should still have that sense of awe. We should still have that idea that it's new every week. It's not just a routine. Prayer, your prayer life either goes down or leaves altogether. Prayer becomes sparse. There are days when it's hard to pray. I get it. There are days in my life when it's hard to pray. But the days in which we find the strength to pray, the days that are easy to pray, should outweigh the times when we can't pray. Or maybe it's because we've lost interest in the idea of prayer. Does God even hear me? Is there even a God out there to hear me if I'm praying? What am I praying to? I think one of the greatest tricks of the devil is not to get you to completely abandon ship, but just to begin questioning why you're on the ship. Like, what am I doing here? I could be doing something better. I could be watching the football game. I could be watching the basketball game. I could be spending time with my family. I could be doing a plethora of other things. Why am I here? And the answer is because Christ gives us a way of life that is something that we've never seen before. Something that we've never experienced before. I said it this morning, and I'll say it, a lot before it's over and done with, that what we do here is not religion. Now, hear me when I say that. What we do here is not religion. It is our life. It is who we are. And the majority of the Christian walk happens outside of these four walls for a reason. It's because it influences the rest of our life. And we need prayer every day to give strength to have somewhere to drop our burdens when the load becomes too heavy. We need somewhere to go when we need to be recharged. And if we allow worship and prayer to not become so important in our lives, then we have nowhere to take those things. We have nowhere to go for strength and to be recharged. And we eventually abandon ship. I appreciate Brother Herndon's thoughts this morning before the Lord's Supper, bringing us to the foot of the cross and trying to keep our minds there. Your mind should still be at the foot of the cross right now. Because what we do here centers around the cross. What we do in our life centers around the cross. And if the act of the cross and if the implications of the cross become distant to you, then drifting away is just as easy as waking up and getting out of bed the next day. It's a sobering thought. And it's something that we shouldn't take lightly. It's something that the Hebrew writer doesn't take lightly. In chapter 2, in verse 1, he talks about how shall we escape judgment if we neglect so great a salvation. The warning in chapter 2, followed up by the warning in chapter 3 of drifting away even further. And the idea of drifting away is like rolling down a river without a paddle. You're just aimlessly going wherever the water takes you. You have no direction. You have no purpose. You have no control over your life. You're at the mercy of whatever life throws at you. And the Hebrew writer is saying, if you let go of Christ, you are that person in the raft. You're the person that doesn't have direction, that doesn't have vision, that doesn't have control over their life. You may have a little control, or you may think you have some control, but in reality you don't. Associated with the danger of drifting away is the danger of the unbelieving heart, the evil, unbelieving heart. Again, in verse 12, take care, brethren, that there not be any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart, because that is the source of our falling away. When things become trivial to us, when worship becomes just part of the routine and prayer just leaves our lives altogether, our heart starts getting hardened. You may not notice it on Monday morning. You may not notice it on Tuesday morning, so Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You may never notice it until years later on down the line. But then when life hits you with its final blow, you come to your senses and you realize, my heart was hardened a long time ago. And I say this a lot too. I stand up here, I'm not immune to this idea. Nobody in this room is immune to this. It can happen to any of us. You would think a man who is constantly in the Word every week and being able to do things like this would stay faithful and hold on. But brethren, I've heard stories of preachers walking away just as quick as regular members walking away. It can happen to anybody. And it begins within the heart. And so, when you think about someone drifting away from here, we often think about their exposure or the lack thereof. But real blessings do not guarantee continued faithfulness. Exposure to truth is not the same as obedience to it. And proximity to God is not equal to loyalty to God. In other words, we can sit in these pews every single week, day in and day out. We could have church every day, and you could be here at every single service. But just you being here is not enough. Like I said, the majority of our walk as a Christian happens in what we do outside of these four walls. Our life of faithfulness is really put to the test outside of these four walls. Just being here, just sitting in these pews. Maybe you're halfway singing the songs. Maybe you're halfway listening to the prayers and the little devotional thoughts. Maybe you somewhat like what the preacher's saying, but just being here does not equal loyalty. It does not equal faithfulness. It does not equal obedience. What we do with our lives is laid on the foundation of what we do here. This is not the all of it. And so this is the cycle. This is the cycle that we're left with. The heart becomes unbelieving. And like I said, it doesn't happen overnight. It may be months and years before it actually starts happening. But it will happen if you start just, casually viewing worship like, well, by religion I'm a Christian. I'm a practicing Christian. But the Bible calls us to live as a Christian, not practice Christianity. And so when that idea of being a practicer of religion enters our mind, the downhill spiral has already started. And that unbelief leads to drifting. And we talked about what drifting looks like. It's like a man in a boat without a way to steer it. If you have no foundation, you have nowhere to go. You have no purpose. You have no direction. And then ultimately that drifting leads to spiritual death. The Hebrew writer says that at the end of chapter 3 and verse 19, so we see that they were not able to enter because of unbelief. He was talking about entering God's rest. And I don't know about you, but there are days when I long for that rest. I very much pray the prayer of John at the end of Revelation where he says, Lord, come quickly. Because when the Lord comes back, then we will be truly at rest. But those of us who have drifted away, those who have that evil, unbelieving heart, they don't get to enter the rest. They don't get to enter into that rest. And let me tell you, if you take worship serious, if you take being a Christian serious, and every week it's like you're constantly in that sense of awe like the early church, and you think it's great to be a child of God, the beauty and the experience of heaven is way greater compared to this. This is nothing compared to heaven. Millions and billions of voices singing around the throne of God, being in the literal presence of our Creator, not having to deal with the trouble of sin and death any longer. Who wouldn't want to be a part of that? But again, falling back on us, there are some times when we don't nurture our faith. There are some times when the church doesn't do its job. And that leads to those individuals falling away. Now, that's far and few in between, but it should never be the case that the church doesn't do her job in nurturing faith. That should never happen. But unfortunately it does, because we're all humans. But I hope seeing it on the screen and hearing it from me this morning, I hope it gets through to you. I hope it pricks your heart like we talked about this morning. Because, again, I've heard too many stories too many times of things going wrong in the life of the Christian. And so what is the responsibility of each Christian? What's our responsibility? How can we prevent people from drifting away? Is the ultimate question. Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 13, but encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still called today, so that none of you will be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. While it is still called today. Because we don't know if we'll wake up tomorrow. We may, but we don't know. Only God knows that. But as long as God gives breath into our lungs and gives us the breath of life and allows us to live longer on this earth, we should use every waking moment to offer some sort of encouragement to our brothers and sisters. Because you never know who's drifting. You never know who you might save. You never know whose life you might change. But the things that you do know for certain are that you don't know if you'll wake up tomorrow. You don't know if they'll wake up tomorrow. And so while it is still called today, encourage one another. Encourage one another. Because eternity is a long time to be lost. Eternity is a long time to be lost. I want you to hear that and again, let that prick your hearts. Sin is deceitful. You know, again, like I talked about this morning, the idea is the devil doesn't expect you to abandon ship right away, but he makes you question as to why you're on the ship to begin with. What am I doing here? What am I doing at the Dover Church of Christ on this great Sunday morning? I could be in the deer blind. I could be traveling back from family. I could be watching the game. I could be doing any other plethora of things. Why am I here? What's so special about here? Hearts harden slowly. It's a slow fade, as some have said. Drifting becomes easier because of isolation. In other words, if we cut ourselves off from our brothers and sisters, if we cut ourselves off from God, drifting becomes easier. But on the flip side of that coin, it is prevented by fellowship. Fellowship one with another, fellowship with God, spending time in prayer, spending time in His words. Drifting is a disease that can be prevented. And so every Christian needs spiritual friendships. They need accountability and accountability partners. They need strong teaching. They need involvement in the service, and they need habit-forming spiritual disciplines in order to keep from drifting. Now, if you're a first-time guest here, you may think, well, this guy's just crazy. He's giving us a hard time, and he's giving his congregation a hard time. But I do what I do up here because I love souls. I teach myself before I teach anyone else. I need to hear this warning and this encouragement just as much as the next guy. And so please don't view me as someone who's sitting on their high horse looking down on everyone, because that's not my goal and that's not the case. My goal is to see every single face that's currently in this room and even beyond in this community enter into those pearly gates of heaven. Into true rest. That's my goal. That's the reason I do what I do every week. And not every message is this bad. Not every message is this straightforward, this blunt. But sometimes we need to have these hard conversations. Sometimes we just need to understand that we do this stuff out of love and for care out of each other's soul. Hebrews 3, 18 and 19. We looked at this a little bit earlier. And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were not able to enter because of unbelief. The event in which the Hebrew writer is talking about is a generation of Israelites who would not enter the promised land because they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to overtake the promised land, even though God told them time and time again that they'd be able to. God said, "This day I have given you this land." The spiritual application for us today. On this day, God has given us the opportunity of heaven. On this day, God has given us the opportunity for rest. And if we reject that offer, if we allow that evil and unbelief to enter into our heart, and if we drift away, we don't get to enter that rest. We don't get to see our Creator face to face. Like I said before, eternity is a long time to be lost. But on the flip side of that coin, eternity is a long time to be with our Father in heaven. And even after tens of thousands of years, it will never get old. Think about that. There will never be a day that the thought crosses your mind that, man, I'm tired of being in heaven. Never happen. And what we do here in this place begins with breaking our hardened hearts and teaches us the way that our heart can be receptive of that opportunity in that way. What we do within these four walls is shaping us and forming us and building us up into that house that is ready and excited to be with our Creator. So consider Jesus. Consider who He is and what He did for us. Take care. Focus on the idea that we need to remain faithful. Christians encourage one another. Because so many times we've watched people walk out those doors back there and they don't ever come back. And ultimately, like I said at the beginning, the ultimate encouragement in the book of Hebrews is to hold on to Jesus. White knuckle grip, hold on to Jesus. And don't ever let go. And one day when you're in heaven, you'll be glad you did. No matter what this world throws at you. I know I've talked a lot about encouraging us to hold on to Jesus and hold on to our salvation. But for those of us who are not in that salvation, we need to talk about how to get you there. You've heard the gospel this morning. You've heard that there is a message of deliverance. You've heard the message that there is a rest waiting for you even right here and right now. I hope you'll believe it. God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. And you can't even begin to seek Him without faith. That's what Hebrews 11:6 says. Jesus said it very plainly and clearly in Luke 13:3. Repent or perish. He goes on to say, if you don't repent, you will die in your sins. There's the two greatest problems in human history, sin and death. But we can change our lives. We can change our attitude towards sins. We can break our hearts. Romans 10:9 and 10, confession that Jesus is Lord and that He is who He claimed to be leads to salvation. And ultimately, it's in baptism when we are truly at the foot of the cross, when our sins are washed away, Romans chapter 6, verses 3 and 4. And we're raised to walk in a newness of life, a new life, a new experience. And if we live faithful, even if it costs us our life, there's a crown of life waiting for us. That rest that the Hebrew writer was mentioning, it can be ours. And it's for us, and God did everything in His power to make it available to us. And so this morning, if you need any assistance whatsoever, whether it's to begin your journey as a Christian or you want to reaffirm your faith as a Christian, what better time to do it than right now? Do not walk out these doors without doing something about your faith if something needs to be done. We stand ready and willing to help you. Won't you please come while together?